Hey y'all, so welcome to day three. We have a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the French Republic, the Reign of Terror, and what the outcomes of this French Revolution are. So let's just jump right on into it. So last class, we left off with the National Assembly ending because it was too weak and had no support from the church. So today we're going to pick up with the French Republic. So when the Constitution of 1791 went into effect, it created the Legislative Assembly, which took much of the power away from the king and gave power to, and was given the power to make laws, approve or reject declarations of war, that sort of thing. The power to enforce laws still belonged to the king, but he was no longer the one making the rules. The French legislature is called the National Convention, and it has three groups. The Girondins, who supported the king, the Jacobins, who were radicals and included men like Jean-Paul Marat, who was a newspaper editor known for writing fiery editorials, in which he often called for the death of those who were loyal to the king. People like Robespierre. Oh no, hang on. Let's go back. People like Robespierre, this fancy guy here. Also, Georges Danton. This is Marat right here with the guy with the crazy looking hair on the right. But Danton was a lawyer who was dedicated to defending the rights of poor Parisians. Okay, now you guys were asking me about Parisians last class. Several of you did. So it's spelled P-A-R-I-S-I-A-N-S. It's Paris with the I-A-N-S on the end. Okay. So Danton was a lawyer. He was dedicated to defending the rights of poor Parisians. And the final group, they really didn't have a name. They didn't really have any kind of particular views one way or another. So the National Convention ends up suspending the office of the king and reducing the king's role to basically the same as a common citizen. National Convention is now led by the Jacobins, which was the radical group, and they put Louis XVI on trial for plotting against the security of France, and they find the king guilty of treason, and they sentence him to death. Okay, and you can see an illustration here. This is his death by guillotine. Okay, he was publicly executed on January 21st, 1793. Now, while Louis XVI had been on the throne, France had been at war with Austria and Prussia. So not only did the National Convention have to deal with a king who had committed treason, they also have to stop the foreign invasion of France by Austria and Prussia. The Committee on Public Safety was set up to protect France from foreign invasion and to do a couple other things as well, which we'll talk about later. To do this, though, there was a conscription or a draft of all unmarried men who were 18 to 25 years old. And of course, not everyone was in agreement with this revolution. There were counter-revolutionary activities as well. And these counter-revolutionaries were folks who still supported the king. So, for example, Jean-Paul Marat, the guy with the brown crazy hair a few seconds ago, he was a newspaper editor I told you about. He was murdered by a woman named Charlotte Corday. He was murdered to death in his bathtub. He actually had an illness where he found relief when he was able to relax in a cool bath. So he had set up, you can see over his little bathtub there, he had set up a little bookshelf. He had like a desk going across his, bathtub there. So he would could work in the tub as well. So she came in and actually murdered him, stabbed him to death. She eventually ends up going to the guillotine as punishment. All right, so this leads us into the Reign of Terror. It lasted from September of 1793 until July of 1794, and the goal was to suppress any and all opposition to and revolts to the revolution. So this was accomplished through extensive use of the guillotine. There were over 40,000 people who were executed during the Reign of Terror. Maximilien Robespierre, I mentioned him a few minutes ago, he was running the show at this time, and he once said, "It is necessary to annihilate both the internal and external enemies of the Republic or perish with its fall." So he's basically saying that anyone who is a threat to France, whether it is from within the country or from outside of France, they need to be eliminated. The folks that Robespierre feared the most were going to be his fellow radicals that challenged his leadership and questioned his leadership as well. Many of these people were sentenced to death, with the reason being basically that they were less radical than Robespierre, that they weren't radical enough. Do you remember George Stanton, the lawyer who defended the poor that I told you about a minute ago? He was even put to death, and as he was on the scaffold right before his execution, he said, "Don't forget to show off my head to the people. It's well worth seeing." So really, no one was safe during the Reign of Terror. Some of the victims, other than Louis XVI and George Stanton, include Marie Antoinette, nobles, the bourgeoisie, peasants. In fact, there was one young peasant who was executed because he had cut down a tree, and supposedly that tree had been planted as a symbol of liberty. So he was viewed as being against, the liberty of France and against the people, and so they had him executed. So with all of this going on, even Robespierre is executed. So in 1794, some of the members of the National Convention were tired of him and his radicalism, and they turned on him. And so they demanded that he be arrested and executed. With Robespierre's death brings the end of the Reign of Terror. And here are some interesting numbers for you. So during the Reign of Terror, at least 300,000 suspects were arrested. There were 17,000 people who were officially, that's the key word here, officially executed. And perhaps maybe 10,000, give or take a few, that died in prison without trial, okay? So where do they go from there? Well, the National Convention underwent some reforms or changes. Remember that the Committee of Public Safety, that they were responsible for the Reign of Terror, but they got rid of the Catholic Church, and they were looking for, oh my goodness, sorry. So they got rid of the Catholic Church, and they were looking for virtuous citizens, okay? Some of the other reforms that they were responsible for was a universal elementary school. Now I'm really going backwards. Oh my. Okay. Universal elementary school. Okay. Wage and price controls as well. Okay. That becomes important because inflation had been so high. So this was an effort to stop inflation. Slavery in French colonies was abolished. The metric system was adopted. Okay. And they also adopted a new calendar. Now, this calendar was pretty special. It didn't last very long, and here are some little reasons perhaps why. There were 10 days in a week. The months were given new names, and it started on September 22nd, 1792, which was the date of the Republic's creation. So you can understand why this calendar didn't last for too long. It doesn't really work too well with other calendars around the world. All right, so in 1795, the leaders in the National Convention, they created a new plan for government. And this was the third form of government that France had had since 1789. So in less than 10 years, they've gone through so many political changes. This government placed the majority of the power firmly in the hands of the upper middle class. It called for a bicameral legislature with an executive body called the Directory. Now, the Directory, they wrote another constitution, and there is a two-house legislature with this. The Directory itself consisted of 5 men who often argued amongst themselves and were not very effective leaders. In fact, they were quite weak. Directory becomes just as unpopular as the old regime, and this is going to pave the way for a military dictatorship to take over France. Okay, so there are 4 things that I need for you to be able to identify as the outcome of the French Revolution. First, we see that it's becoming a secular society. So the government and the church are separate. Second, we see the end of absolutism and the divine right of kings. Next, we see a massive swell in nationalism, which is pride in one's country. So think about Napoleon here, okay? That's where we're going next. And the final outcome is the democratic ideas that are reflected through writings like the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Okay, so that wraps up your notes for today. Next class, we are going to discuss Napoleon, this guy right here, and the Congress of Vienna. That's what it's all about. that will wrap up your notes. So the day 4 video will be the last video that you'll have for this. Pop back in here for a second. This will be the last video that you'll have for the unit. So just make sure that you are remembering to keep your notes. If you haven't watched all of the videos, you are definitely going to need to go back and watch them and take all of the notes. If you have questions about your notes, if you're not sure that you got the right information written down, please come see me. Once I see that you have at least made a good effort to take the notes, I'm happy to share my notes with you, okay? And you're welcome to come do that during your It's Academic or after school, before school, whatever works for you. Just communicate with me. So make sure you get that done, because after that, starting on the 14th, 15th, 16th, 19th, 20th, and 21st, those are going to be the days that we are working on our in-class projects. So please make sure you bring your notes to class that day. All right, I'll see you then. Bye.